All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm Christine Goebel with a company Suite, and we're here to talk about what your team isn't saying. We've got about 30 minutes of information, and then we've got 15 minutes on the back end, maybe a little bit more for some Q&A. So if there's questions that are coming to your mind throughout the session, please feel free. You can either put them in the chat. You could save them for later. If you really want to be brave and ask, just know that if you ask your question during the recording portion of the webinar, that other people will have that information and it'll be out there. So however comfortable you are, feel free to ask away. So a little bit about a company Suite. And so we are an organizational health and development company, and we're on mission to restore workplaces and relationships. Because we know that everything that happens at work does pour into families and communities. And so we want to make sure that all that communication that's happening in there is good and healthy, including conflict. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just what you do with it. And so we do that through a number of different ways. So we've got programs which are longer term, more about change throughout an organization. We have team building workshops, and those workshops are more of the we come in and we're creating connection with your team. We've also got some personal and professional development. So if you're in a situation where you're like, I'm stuck, I want out of here, I want something different for my life, we can help you with that. And if you've got something where you're saying, you know what, I like where I'm at, but I want to grow and I want to develop, we've got some individual sessions for that as well. And so the whole point of this is no matter what book you read, no matter what system you implement, no matter what that is, a process, a program, if the health of the people isn't above par, meaning we're only going to be as good as the level of emotional intelligence that the people around us have. And those are things like self-awareness, relationship management, self-management, and things like that. So we are here today to talk really deep into what we have as far as identifying the things that you feel like your team isn't saying. How do you even recognize it? So we want to identify the things not being said. We want to talk about the understanding how the assumptions they influence trust, and then we want to prevent those assumptions from replacing understanding. We're going to talk about discovering the conversations, decisions, and tensions that affect performance long before they become visible as far as organizational challenges. And then we're going to wrap up. I'm going to give you 3 questions that will surface truth fast. And then how do you strengthen communication when you're asking those kinds of questions? All right, so love to start with a poll. So the first poll we're going to go into is which statement most likely creates a problem in an organization. So I'm actually going to pull up the poll and you can go ahead and answer that. So which statement is most likely to create a problem in an organization? All right. All right, so it looks like everybody that answered, I assumed. All right. So here's the reality about this question. They all create potential problems. So it was kind of a trick question. And so these are things that if we're fortunate enough that these are said out loud, we're in good shape. And so it's important for you to understand what they actually mean. And so they can all create problems, especially if there's a lack of trust throughout the organization. And so I want to point a couple things out. So I disagree isn't necessarily a problem in itself. In fact, I would say out of all the things up here, this is probably the healthiest statement that's on the slide. And it's typically one that makes people feel a little bit more defensive. And so the problem that occurs when there is disagreement and it's not explored, people stop sharing perspective. So if you start to get agreement because they've said, I disagree, but that never gets resolved. So what you have is a fake agreement, and the innovation and the better ideas that happen when we disagree, they never ever surface. And so you're pretty much left with some poor decision making. So next we've got I don't understand. And so this, again, it's not a problem, it's an invitation. And so the problem will only occur when leaders don't stop to clarify what it is that they don't understand. And so that misalignment is only going to lead to some frustration inside your organization if you don't explore it. Especially if they're the kind of person that says, I don't understand often, we have to be careful that we're either figuring out what it is that they don't understand, or have we put them in a role that maybe they're not quite ready for. All right, so this was the one that everybody pegged. So I assumed it is dangerous. Okay, so we all make a lot of assumptions. And the hard part here is that when you make assumption, it often feels like a fact. And so assumption, when there's nobody that's pushing it to try to seek understanding or get more clarity, it just leads to the wrong conclusion. And so assumption in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I like to use the analogy, right? If a lion's running at me and I'm making an assumption that I should get out of the way and run, that's a pretty good assumption. So I need to get out of the way, right? But here in America, more often than not, there's not a lion running at us. There's lies coming at us, but not a lion. And so I want to make sure that what happens with assumption is that we understand that assumption is part of problem solving. It's how we draw to conclusions, but we want to make sure that we seek understanding so we aren't drawing the wrong conclusions. So great job on I assumed. And then the last one is it's fine. And we've all said it. But what's interesting about it's fine is it's actually the most deceptive of these four statements that are on the screen. Because sometimes it really does mean it's fine. I'm good. It's fine. We move on. And those are that usually coming out of the mouth of somebody who's a little more direct. You can usually tell that they're probably fine. However, if it means something like, I don't want to argue, or I don't think this matters that much, or you know what, I'm just done trying, it's just fine because I give up. If we have that, we want to take a minute and start asking some open-ended questions to see if there's some hidden concerns that need to be surfaced. We don't want to dismiss this comment because there's probably something you need to know that isn't coming out. And it might be they're so discouraged that they're not actually going to be productive that day. And this stuff takes time and it takes a lot of effort. And so obviously you wouldn't be on the call if you weren't hearing a lot of these things. And we've just got to work through it and have the patience and the time to actually deal with it. Because if we're hearing this and we're not uncovering it, they're telling somebody else. And so we want to make sure we're minimizing the amount of noise and gossip and drama and all those things that happen behind the scenes. We want to minimize that. So again, none of these statements alone are a problem. The problem is just when we fail to figure out what's underneath it. And so we are here to recognize what is underneath it, because if we don't, guess what's happening? All that trust, the collaboration, and the performance is going to suffer if we don't dig it out. All right, so how do we identify it? So I like to keep it simple. We've got leading indicators and lagging indicators. And just to make sure everybody's on the same page, a leading indicator predicts the future, and a lagging indicator is going to reflect your past performance and outcomes. So a lagging indicator, these are some examples of what that is. Like this is the results. This is the thing that already happened. And so we're just kind of reviewing reports here. And so we want to start diagnosing things with behavior the same way we diagnose organizational problems. And now I want you to see some of these leading indicators. These are things that we can actually see happening or feel it happening. And so all these things are visible. And so we just need to know what you should be looking for and what you should be listening for. And that's where I'm going to focus most of today's talk. All right, so hearing what's not being said. So there's two things I want you to pay attention to. It's what they don't say and what they suddenly stop saying. So you might see some symptoms like increased absenteeism, slowed production, but we have to think about the thing that comes actually before that happens. So before that stuff shows up, we have things like decreased engagement in a meeting. So this person always participates and suddenly they're not participating, or suddenly they're super agreeable. And if that starts to happen, it means I give up. I'm not even gonna bother anymore. Okay, so it might be things like all of a sudden they're quiet, or maybe they're irritable, or they are just maybe they're always negative now, where they didn't used to be like that and now they're like that. I mean, it could be one of you, right? I've been there, it's been me. And so we have to pay attention to the small cues that are coming before the big ones. All right, so let's talk about what even causes that silence to begin with. So, people are going to stop speaking up when they believe that speaking up isn't going to make any difference at all. So, we only have a certain amount of bandwidth to make decisions in the course of the day. And so, if it's like self-preservation, right? So, we're going to keep our mouth shut if there's no point in saying anything. And so, I want you to know some of these might actually fall on leadership too. So let's just think about it in terms of how am I leading and what am I seeing? And some of this you might even feel some of this too. Okay, so the first one is people get overwhelmed. So, especially in helping professions, so if you're in medicine or you are responsible for a lot of people and the safety of those people, so what happens here is there tends to be understaffing and there tends to be a lot of change fatigue that happens. And so that's just a lot of changes that happen in the organization constantly that it almost feels impossible to try to keep everything like together because it's always changing. And so they may just be trying to get through the day and their best thinking isn't really brought to the table until they get some rest and we start addressing the cause of the overwhelm. Next, we have people that perceive that things happen to them and not with them. And so this could be something like a new system gets put in place, new processes, organizational changes, role changes, new leadership. So if they're not part of that change and understanding why the change is happening, they think it's happening to them, right? So I believe decisions are going to be made regardless of what I think. And so we support people and we do that well when we involve them in what's going on, which leads me to my voice doesn't matter. And so when we tend to think our voice doesn't matter, it's sometimes even worse, right? Maybe they'll ask for input, but they don't acknowledge it in the decision making. So they've asked you for input, you've given it, they make a completely different decision, and no one communicated why the change was happening in the first place. They don't explain how it's going to impact them, when it's going to happen, all those kinds of things. And so when ideas are dismissed, they start thinking, why bother? Why do it? So if there's decisions being made in your organization that affects the team, it's crucial to get some input. And now this isn't necessarily you have to do the thing that they told you, but it is when you ask for input, you better be ready, especially if you're not going to follow the advice, to talk to them about why the advice wasn't followed. It's okay to not agree with every idea that your staff brings to you. Absolutely okay to do that. They just have to understand why, and then they'll move on. We don't have to necessarily, I'm not saying you have to explain everything that you do, but we do need to communicate, especially if we're asking for some feedback. Okay. So on the other side of it, we've got things like avoided conversations. And so these are talks you know you need to have, but you're just not having them. And so when we keep putting things off like that, the only result that we're going to get is people are going to be frustrated and disappointed. And so next we've got decision making without getting perspective. And so this is if you are making decisions and you are not gaining perspective of the people who are actually doing the job, we have a little bit of an issue here because we're going to miss out on gaining perspective. And so the further the decision maker is from the person actually doing the job, so some of you are in really large organizations, the more the perspective of the person making the decision is actually going to be wrong. It's more likely that that's what's going to happen. And so finally, we have something called tensions unexplored. And so when tensions are unexplored, we have avoided conflict for the sake of keeping the peace. Sometimes we do this in our own home. And so sometimes when we don't want to deal with something, we actually miss out on the innovation that's just brewing within all of our people. And so when this is done well, we press into those tensions that are happening, and the result can be incredible in such a good way. And I will tell you, for me, that is one of my most favorite things I get to do is that I get to help people explore some of the tensions they're having in the workplace, and we get to uncover it and move on so that those tensions don't keep holding up production. All right, so none of these situations are going to automatically create distrust in your organization, but they are going to create some observations. And then people start making, they make up a meaning to those observations. So if the understanding doesn't occur, and we don't understand why these things are happening, we're going to start to fill in the blank with a lot of assumptions. And the assumptions will become the story that people tell themselves about leadership, the organization, and each other. And we have to make sure that story is as accurate as possible. Because we're human, we're going to make some stuff up in our heads. All right. So I want to talk to you a little bit about trust here. And so I think this is really important. This here is the foundation of most of our workshops and programs are built on how to build trust. And so we've got right in the middle, I want you to just take a look. I'm going to go through this super fast. There's a stimulus that happens, an occurrence that happens, and we have two choices when that happens. We either observe it and move forward, or we start judging it and we move backward. And so I want you to look at the gap in between resentment, which is all the way on the left of your screen, and trust, which is on the right side of your screen. So assumption is the thing that happens that starts to move us away from trust. And so it might be an assumption that's just, I'm being skeptical right now. So I'm just I am judging it because I'm running it through my own litmus test of, do I think this is accurate or not accurate? But the only way I start to eke forward is understanding. And then once there's understanding in a relationship, because I've asked questions and I'm listening and I'm just seeking to understand, once I've got that, I then move the relationship to a place of respect and value. So I've earned respect because I asked the questions, I listened. They now value the relationship more. So now I'm in a place of trust. If I go to the other side and I'm stuck on that assumption and I don't ask a question and I don't speak up, I now move to being very frustrated and very disappointed, which is only leading me to resentment. So if you're in a situation right now where there is a level of resentment happening in your workplace, I'm like biting my tongue, but I'm not gonna. So, all right, you either need to find a new workplace or You need to start moving the needle. Be frustrated and disappointment, but start asking questions. Start seeking to understand. Be bold, be quick, and just be true to yourself on what it is that you want out of life and the kind of workplace you want to have, and start being the change you want to see. Okay, so let's just talk about getting from assumption to understanding, because this part's super important. Open-ended questions. Who, what, when, where, and how. I left out why on purpose. You ask the question why when you are in a place of assumption. If you're not in a trusted relationship, people will get defensive. So that's just a side note. Keep why questions out of your tool belt for a little bit and use them later. And then, as far as actively and empathetically listening to somebody, I'm not saying take on the emotions of other people, because if you're in a situation where you are taking on the emotions of others, you've got to work through that, because that's damaging and that's not going to help you. But I am saying let's understand what someone's saying, which are having ears to hear. And so when we have ears to hear, that means we comprehend what's being said to us. We're not just hearing words, we're not just making assumptions. We comprehend what we are hearing, and we do that through the questions. All right, one more poll. So people spend about 55% of their time listening, and on average, what percentage of information do most people actually retain? All right. Yeah. Yeah, it's 20%. And so what's interesting about this is if we're spending 20% of our time, that's all that we're retaining from the 55% of the time we're spent listening. So we spend half our time in life listening, but only retaining a tiny, tiny bit of it. And so the only way you make that bigger is you actually start asking questions and listening. All right, so we're here, we're at our 3 bonus questions. All right, so this is leading indicator questions. And the first one, so I broke them up into 3 things. So we're either dealing with a workplace that has risks, they're trying to uncover opportunities, or they want to see something that might be hidden. So the first question here, if we're trying to assess risk in the organization, I've got what's something that could impact, could be our team, our product, our service, our vendor, that we aren't paying enough attention to. So you fill in the blank, whatever is most relevant to your workplace. I want to make sure that you fill in the blank with that. The second question is, this is for opportunity. What's one thing that if we improved it would have the greatest positive impact on the team? So they all have an idea. We just want to make sure that they uncover it. And then finally, what's hidden? What's something others may be seeing that leadership doesn't see yet? And so you got to be ready when you ask questions like this. You got to be prepared to listen to whatever the answer is, right, wrong, indifferent. This is not about defending yourself or defending your decision making. This is about listening, and just keep digging into that question. So I'm giving you a couple bonus here about how do I even dig into the question like that. And so you should always be saying, and what else? Tell me more. Did I miss something? I'm sure somebody's got something else. And then you have to sit quiet enough to ensure that they actually keep speaking up. So we want to make sure that that just keeps coming at us. And what else? And tell me more. And what's cool about and what else and tell me more? What's really cool about that is we then open up opportunity to actually think a little bit and give ourselves, if you need to talk yourself down, talk yourself down. That's going to be really important. And so here, I want you to also notice a couple of things, that every single question that I'm putting out there starts with what. And this is a critical thing for you to know, because each kind of question lends itself to a different kind of answer. So if I ask, how do we do it? that's immediately going to get people to try and solve it. That's not what we're doing. These kinds of questions are not problem-solving questions. These are let me uncover more information questions. That's why we ask what. If we ask when questions, they immediately start taking like, oh, when is this going to happen? This is a time thing. And if I ask why, they're going to try to dissect it. So we don't want any of that. We just want to uncover it and make it visible, which is why you ask a what question. All right. So main thing, if nothing changes, people will stop speaking up. We want to take action. And so if, like I said earlier, if we're going to spend half our day listening and only retain a very small portion of it, we've got to get better. So this is the self-awareness and self-management and social awareness and relationship management. So this is all of emotional intelligence. We want to ask better questions, gain some stronger listening habits. And so we want to close that gap between the half of my day and only 20% of what I'm actually retaining. And so visibility, it's not going to happen by accident. We have to ask questions. We have to hear what they're actually saying and comprehend it. We've got to take some action because the more curious that we are, the more we understand, the better decisions we're going to make. So, this is our aha moment. So, asking the right questions, again, this is just creating visibility. We have ears to hear, understanding it's going to create that insight that you're actually looking for. So, we want to take action. And how do we do that? We follow up. We listen to the answers to the questions we ask, then we take action. That's what's going to build trust in your organization. This is not about everyone agreeing, but this is about everyone having an understanding of what they're about, why they're doing what they're doing, and how their job is impacted every step of the way. All right, so nothing changes. People stop speaking up. People stop speaking up. We lose visibility. And when we lose visibility, performance in your whole organization is going to suffer. So I just want to first say thank you. We're going to get into Q&A in just a second. I'm going to put a link in the chat for 15 minutes. So if you've got questions and you don't want to ask them during this time, there's going to be a link in the chat that you can hop on. And you can just get on my calendar and spend some time with me, and I will help you. I could either help you pre-brief a conversation you're going to have, and then I'd be happy to meet with you again to debrief and see how it went and give you some pointers, or we could just talk through some stuff happening in your workplace. And that's my direct contact information, so you can feel free to contact me directly.